Hi everyone, it's Katrina. The Books of Breathing. The Books of Breathing are a series of ancient Egyptian books that contain the secrets to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians were so sure that they knew what would happen to the soul after the body died that they had the entire journey from death to the afterlife mapped out in these mysterious ancient texts. The books represent a collection of funerary literature dating back about 2,300 years. The purpose of these books was to assist the dead on their journey to the next world. The word breathing in this case is just a metaphor for the continuation of the deceased soul as they moved into the great beyond. And unlike a lot of other ancient Egyptian texts, archaeologists have found several examples of the books of breathing, still intact and currently housed in museums around the world. One of the very first books of breathing to be found was acquired in 1894 by the Field Museum of Natural History, gifted to them by an American businessman who purchased it while traveling in Europe. Just recently, Professor Foy Scalf analyzed the book in a way never done before. Through his research, he learned that the text was written and illustrated by a single scribe using a split-reed Calamos pen, and that the scribe wrote over the seams on the papyrus sheets. So, how were these books used? The first book of breathing was placed under the deceased's head, while the second book of breathing was placed under their feet. The books were to be kept there so that the spirit could read them and learn how to travel into the afterlife and not get stuck. The professor also learned that the books were made up of a selection of older spells, taken from the original Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Pope's erotic novel. Pope Pius II was born in the year 1405, and from August 1458 until his death in 1464, he was the indisputable ruler of the Catholic Church and the Papal States. But before the Pope turned to the priesthood, he lived a pretty exciting life. He left his family farm at 18, studied in Florence, served as a secretary to the Bishop of Fermo, had children out of wedlock, and wrote an erotic novel. As far as we know, this is the only pope in history who wrote his very own romance novel, detailing adultery, fiery passion, and erotic scandal. We don't know everything that happened to Pope Pius II, but we know that he had a very robust love life, to say the least. He fathered at least one child outside of marriage, and he was a prolific writer. His most famous work was a book called, in English, The Tale of Two Lovers. It's a steamy romance novel complete with erotic illustrations and everything. It details the story of lovers Lucretia and Euryalus who met at a funeral. Their very first interaction is giving one another flirty glances over the body of a dead person. Once he was ordained, the new Pope Pius II tried hard to hide the recklessness of his youth, but much to his dismay, his erotic novel, The Tale of Two Lovers, became one of the best-selling books of the 15th century. The Book of Poisons. In the year 1600, give or take a few years, a secret stash of poison was bound just like a book and turned into a secret stash of fatal elixirs. This artifact is called the Assassin's Cabinet of Poison, and it's not actually a book. Rather, it's a very tiny cabinet containing lethal substances that can be used for assassinating people. It's kind of like a hollowed-out Bible, a secret hiding place 400 years old. The pages of an actual book were glued together to create a large block, and then that block was hollowed out and installed with 11 tiny drawers. In the bottom corner of the book is a small glass jar, and on all the drawers is a handwritten label describing the lethal compound hidden inside. The Assassin's Book is something of a mystery. We don't know if it really was an assassin's toolkit or a mobile pharmacy. It could have been used for good or evil. It's hard to say, since it could be snuck into pretty much anywhere. We don't know much else about it because nobody knows where it came from. The mysterious Book of Poison appeared in 2008 and went up for auction in Europe and sold for $5,590. Before it was sold, scientists were able to find out what was actually kept in the little drawers. There was stinking nightshade, opium poppy, wolfsbane, water hemlock, mandrake, devil's snare, valerian, spurge laurel, palm of Christ, naked lady, and belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. Deadly nightshade was used during the days of the Roman Empire to create poison-tipped arrows. The Book of Insects. Inside one of the college libraries at the University of Cambridge, stashed deep in Trinity Hall, there is a mysterious book on insects. The book dates back roughly 400 years to 1634 and was only recently opened up. When the book was was opened, a researcher discovered a perfectly preserved butterfly sandwiched between the pages. The university now believes the butterfly was probably left inside the ancient insect book by its original owner way back in the 17th century. The find was just made by a librarian in Trinity Hall when she was looking through ancient animal texts. The butterfly is just as colorful as the day it was put in the book, even though the dead insect is unbelievably old. And although researchers say it's pretty common for plant specimens to be found pressed into old books, it's almost unheard of to find insects. The book is called The Wonderful Theater of Insects, donated to the college by a book collector named Lawrence Strangman when he died in 1980. The Book of Kels. Some historians have called the Book of Kels the greatest treasure of medieval Europe. It's a cherished masterpiece of Ireland, a beautifully illustrated Bible that was created by monks sometime between the 6th and 8th centuries. These monks lived on the remote Scottish island of Iona, cramped in primitive stone huts and exposed to the raging ocean winds. The most extraordinary thing about the book is that these isolated monks could complete such a surprising masterpiece in such a harsh environment. The most extravagant illustrations are found on the covers of the 4 Gospels, which form the Latin text of the manuscript. The monks had limited materials, lived in hollowed-out rocks that looked kind of like beehives, and their only other company was the seagulls. The island of Iona is quite similar to Skellig Michael with its beehive monasteries, a truly remote and challenging place even these days. Back in the 6th century, the island was under constant threat of Viking raids. It was one reason that the monks took refuge on the smaller islands off the coast, so they could hide. All these years later, the Book of Kels is still in fairly good condition. Only 60 of its pages are missing, which is pretty good considering it was stolen from the stone church of Kells in the year 1006. Then it showed up in some ruins in 1653 and was sent to Dublin, where it eventually made its way to Trinity College, where it remains safe and sound. The Little Children's Little Book. 500 years ago, an unknown author wrote a book on etiquette and table manners. The book was aimed at children, warning them against such faux pas as picking their noses, burping, and eating all the cheese. It's called The Little Children's Little Book, and it was published in 1480, written in Middle English, the predecessor of modern English. It was clearly written to help children behave in a more noble and proper manner, but I wonder who was making them read this? Parents? Nannies? In any case, the history of this book has led researchers to believe it was probably written by someone of noble birth, or at least written intending to be sold to royal households. Children are warned in the book not to drink too much while their lord is drinking, not to laugh, grin, speak out of turn, and spit across the table. They shouldn't pick their teeth with a knife, shouldn't pick their ears, and shouldn't be greedy when food is brought out. Believe it or not, these types of books were extremely popular in Europe all the way to the 18th century. According to the British Library, it's called a courtesy book, and it was taken very seriously. The author even makes a direct link between good behavior and religion. For example, they say that curtsying is an act that comes directly from heaven. There are 3 copies currently stored at the British Library, with 3 others in private collections. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Tyrannel and Mandy Bobbitt for supporting Origins Explained. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. The Black Book of Carmarthen. The Black Book of Carmarthen dates back to 1250 AD and is currently held in the National Library of Wales. It's the earliest manuscript we know about written solely in the Welsh language. It's also one of the very first books in history to contain any mention of King Arthur and the wizard Merlin. The book was probably written by a single scribe who collected and recorded a variety of material over his life, such as poetry, folklore, and religious tales. Professor Paul Russell with the University of Cambridge has been working for years to unlock the secrets of this manuscript. Just recently, the professor used ultraviolet light on the manuscript pages to reveal a pair of ghostly faces. The discovery of the sketches came as a total surprise. Someone had drawn these ghoulish faces in the book almost 1,000 years ago, then erased them. The erased images were covered over in writing, and it was only with the ultraviolet light that they were seen for the first time. Nobody knows who these faces belong to or why they are in the book, only that they are extremely creepy. Less creepy was the fish that researchers found a few pages further on, also revealed under the ultraviolet light. Someone had used this book for their doodles, before it became the Black Book of Carmarthen, the Doomsday Book. The Doomsday Book is a record of the very first major survey done in England to keep tabs on the public. You can think of it like the very first census, done just about 1,000 years ago at the order of William the Conqueror. In the year 1085, the king decided he needed to create a registry for every single person who lived in his kingdom. So William, who was the very first Norman king of England, sent his agents to survey every single English shire, as well as some parts of Wales. The list included the holdings of every single person, and of course, how many taxes they owed to the king. In total, more than 200,000 people are counted in the Doomsday Book, each of whom was the head of a family. The entire plot behind the creation of this manuscript was to get a handle on the taxes which had been owed to the previous ruler, King Edward the Confessor. Once William had the list all figured out, he could assert his right to collect that money. In simple terms, it was an extremely complicated door-to-door operation to start a record of the population. Some argue for the king to extort. But there was much information revealed in this census, and it has helped us learn a lot about how the population has increased and changed. Surprisingly, the book has survived all the way to today and is currently being held at the National Archives at Kew in London. The Book of Exposition. The Book of Exposition is one of the most controversial and forbidden texts that's ever been written in Arabic. It's a collection of erotica from the 15th century. Nobody knows exactly who wrote the book or where it came from, but most educated guesses say it was Jalal ad-Din al-Suyuti, written sometime around the year 1500. He was an Egyptian polymath and erotologist. It's believed that he's probably the one behind the over 24 stories presented in this book. Things that would be outrageous even in a modern novel. These are taboos that had no place in the Arab Islamic world. To give you an idea of the wacky stories that are put in this book, let's look at one in particular. A certain man is given 3 wishes which Allah will grant him. When his wife learns the wishes, she requests that his instrument be lengthened. What follows is both comical and wildly inappropriate. There's even a story in the book titled The Pious Woman and What Happened to Her from Behind. We'll just leave it at that. Let's say that you would be surprised this was from the 15th century. Codex Seraphinianus. The Codex Seraphinianus is a strange art book that isn't very old, written by Luigi Serafini. It was published in 1981 as a sort of visual encyclopedia, and while it's filled with some beautiful images and unusual illustrations, it's also written in a strange language that's never been deciphered. The whole allure of the book is that it appears to be an encyclopedia detailing monsters, plants, and facets of a world totally alien to our own. It's over 300 pages of unintelligible descriptions and confusing imagery. A man riding his own coffin, a creature floating on the surface of the sea with weird fish eyes, and a couple in bed who morphs into a crocodile. In reality, this text is really just a creative handbook made by an artistic genius. It's a book containing a fantasy world, a kind of a blend between Alice in Wonderland and an unexplored planet in outer space. Although the nonsense language in the book has fascinated conspiracy theorists as a kind of indecipherable alien tongue, it means nothing. The author even admitted it, saying the strange script he uses in the book to describe the pictures doesn't mean anything at all. So, while this is definitely a mysterious book, it's not some kind of mystic work written by aliens with secrets of the universe. Or maybe the author just wants to keep the mystery alive.
The CBU Manuscript. The CBU Manuscript is a mysterious document that was discovered in Romania in 1961. Unlike many other ancient texts, it doesn't describe lost cities or civilizations of giants. Instead, it proves that 500 years ago, technology was already way ahead of its time. This ancient text details how to use liquid fuel in multi-stage rockets, a technology that wasn't utilized in any meaningful way until about a century ago. The manuscript was originally published in the 16th century, although some experts say it may have used even earlier manuscripts for inspiration. It was uncovered by Professor of Science and Technology Doru Tordeciu from the University of Bucharest. It was hiding deep in the archives, and Doru couldn't believe his eyes when he found it. Included in the manuscript was page after page of technical data on everything from artillery to multi-stage rockets, complete with illustrations and descriptions. It was a man named Konrad Haas who authored the manuscript between 1550 and 1570. He likely worked for the King of Hungary and may have been a military engineer. We don't know where he got the information to create rockets or how to combine liquid fuel for propulsion systems, but he seemed to have endless knowledge on the topic. However, we aren't sure if he was really able to launch any rockets. There is no historical evidence of a rocket being launched in the 1500s. This makes the manuscript even more mysterious because Konrad Haas had the knowledge of how to create rockets, but for some reason, never made one. The Tuli Papyrus. The Tuli Papyrus appears to be evidence of ancient aliens visiting Egypt in the 18th dynasty, right around the year 1480 BC, roughly 3,500 years ago. This text describes how a massive UFO appeared in the sky during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III. It was discovered by Alberto Tuli from the Egyptian wing of the Vatican Museum. He was visiting Cairo in 1933 when he allegedly came across the papyrus at an antique shop, and yet he never got the original text. He copied it because it was too expensive to buy, and since then it's been copied and recopied for decades. Nobody knows where the original papyrus went, or if it was even real to begin with. Whatever the case may be, most scholars agree that the Tuli Papyrus was almost definitely real. It may have been part of the Annals of Thutmose III. It says that in the year 22, during the third month of winter at the 6th hour of the day, a fiery disk was seen in the sky. It descended from the heavens toward the house of the pharaoh. Those who witnessed the flying object fell to their bellies in terror, but nobody knew what the mysterious disk was. After several days, more objects appeared in the sky. They shined with a brightness fiercer than the sun, like an army of orbs from outer space. Then, as quickly as they'd come, they vanished. If this is to be believed, the papyrus seems to describe an entire Egyptian city witnessing a fleet of spaceships hovering in the atmosphere before turning around and disappearing. What do you think actually happened here? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The Monastery of Sakya. The Monastery of Sakya is a library that was discovered in Tibet, which allegedly contains 84,000 secret manuscripts. The history of all humanity for the past 10,000 years is also said to be hiding here. Even more unbelievable is that the whole secret manuscript collection was discovered sealed behind a mysterious wall. Some say this is the biggest ancient library in the history of the world. These same people claim that the library was likely sealed by an ancient order of Tibetan monks in the days before Chinese communism bulldozed its way into the region. Unfortunately, we have no legitimate pictures of the supposed Tibetan library. We have no confirmed news sources or citations to confirm the existence of such a mysterious place. Right now, all we have are rumors that the monastery was discovered in 2003. There's also a report that states 84,000 scrolls of ancient holy writings were found stored in a wall at the Sakya Monastery near Shigatse in Tibet. This monastery is a real place, and it does have tens of thousands of ancient texts, most of them Buddhist writings. But as far as we know, none of the texts date back 10,000 years. Maybe there was a mysterious section of hidden text found at the monastery with information that could flip history on its head. But if so, we don't know what those texts contained. We also don't know why the discovery may have been swept so swiftly under the rug. Manicastra. The Manicastra is a Sanskrit text describing in phenomenal detail advanced aerospace technology. The text states that Vimanas, supposed flying vehicles used by the Indian people thousands of years ago, were indisputably real. It says these flying vehicles were advanced pieces of technology not unlike modern rockets, capable of moving between planets. According to the script, the Vimanas used a Mercury vortex core engine for their propulsion, something similar to electric, but far more effective. Surprisingly, the Manicastra is not an ancient text. It was revealed to the public in 1952, supposedly written by a man named Pandit Subbaraya Shastri. The information in the manuscript was given to him by the Hindu sage Bharadvaja, an ancient man who may or may not have existed in the earliest days of Hinduism. To put it in context, it would be like if a Christian was given secret information by the ghost of Noah or Abraham. Unfortunately, the information appears to be fiction. The Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore did a study on the text and found most of its information to be nonsense. They concluded in 1974 that the descriptions of the flying vehicles in the book showed a complete lack of understanding of aeronautics. The Voyage Code. The Voyage Code was discovered in a European castle and is a mystery that goes back 600 years. The Medieval Codex, a baffling text composed of 240 pages, is seemingly indecipherable. Computer scientists, brilliant scholars, and the world's best code crackers have never been able to decode the language written in this mysterious book. It's filled with drawings of strange plants, mysterious astrological symbols, and even has pictures of nude women. It defies logic, and it makes very little sense to those who have tried to understand it. The biggest mystery, though, is that the manuscript is filled with unknown writing in a language that has apparently been lost to time. Gerard Cheshire from the University of Bristol recently argued the script is a mixture of languages, something he called proto-romance. On the other hand, an anthropologist from Foothill College believes the text was written in an obscure form of Roman shorthand, some kind of vulgar Latin dialect. Sadly, nobody has ever been able to break the Voyage Code, which was almost certainly authored several hundred years ago. But there are people out there who believe it was written by a prophet in the 15th century, somebody who transcribed the secrets of the earth and the universe. It's shoutout time! We'd like to give a huge thank you to Brenda DeFazio and Hardcore Gaming for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. Manuscript 512. Manuscript 512 is a mysterious script of unknown origin which describes the discovery of a lost city in the state of Bahia, Brazil in 1753. The manuscript was first found at the National Library of Brazil in 1839, where it's still kept safe and secure today. What's really strange about the manuscript is that it describes things that are unbelievable. It suggests a group of explorers wandered into the jungle and discovered ancient artifacts from Rome, as well as a lost city that may have been inhabited by Europeans centuries before the Portuguese arrived. These days, Manuscript 512 is considered one of the greatest mysteries in Brazilian history. It was hugely debated in the 19th and 20th centuries, and it was even an inspiration for several adventurers and explorers. Apparently, in 1925, Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett walked into the jungle looking for the infamous lost city in Brazil and was never seen or heard from again. The manuscript says that a Portuguese colonel and his party were exploring a mountain range when they found a path to its top. When they reached the peak of the mountain, they came across a settlement that they initially mistook for an ordinary Brazilian city. However, when they started wandering through the area, they found Roman arches, mysterious inscriptions in an unknown language, and all manner of strange designs carved on the walls of structures. They allegedly came across everything from Christian crosses to Nordic-style swirls and spires. The city also featured an obelisk, and there were relief carvings of powerful men who resembled Roman emperors. Unfortunately, this city has never been found, nor has the author of the manuscript ever been identified. But if the text is correct, somewhere in the jungles of Brazil is a lost city of ancient Roman design. The Gospel of Judas. The Gospel of Judas is another non-canonical religious book that could change human history if it turned out to be factual. The content of the book is highly controversial and is undoubtedly the reason it's considered nonsense by most Christians. The pages of the book contain multiple conversations between Jesus Christ and Judas Iscariot, the man who sold him to the Romans for 30 pieces of silver. There is only a single surviving copy of this text, written in the Coptic language and dated to the year 180 AD. The Gospel of Judas is a major shock because instead of portraying Judas as an evil and treacherous monster who gets Jesus crucified, it shows Judas as a steadfast believer in Christ. It claims the other disciples never learned the true gospel, and that Judas was the only one who did. It sets Judas as the sole follower of Jesus, and the only one who truly understood Jesus' holy gospel. It explains that Judas sold Jesus to the Romans because he was ordered to by Jesus himself, who knew his fate was to die upon the cross. If this were true, it would mean the other disciples never fully grasped the message of Christ. This itself would mean the church was built upon lies and is not, in fact, the true church of God. The Curn Bible. The Curn Bible is allegedly a collection of texts believed to be taken straight from two ancient manuscripts. The first was written by ancient Egyptians shortly after the Exodus of the Bible, which describes when Moses and the Israelites went back to the Holy Land. The second manuscript was written by Celtic priests around the same time the New Testament was created. The original book, which contained these two manuscripts, was supposedly kept at Glastonbury Abbey in England until around 1184. However, someone tried to burn it, and so it was given to a private guardian. The book was then passed down through generations up until the Chaldean Trust in 1980. In other words, the Curn Bible was handed down from generation to generation since the days of Moses, kept by a secret religious organization that is still functioning today. Surprisingly, the Curn Bible is available for anyone who wants to read it. It's a very strange collection of information about flying objects in the sky, Planet X, aliens who visited Earth, and the supposed apocalypse that was supposed to happen in 2012. It also contains information on Celtic and Egyptian spirituality, King Arthur, cults, and the fall of capitalism. The Book of Giants. The Book of Giants was written in the antediluvian days of our planet, which means it was authored prior to the biblical flood. Before God sent a mighty deluge to wipe humanity and the evil Nephilim off the face of the earth, the events of the Book of Giants took place. It's a true piece of ancient literature, part of the forbidden collection of biblical scripture that the Church refused to add to the Bible. The first traces of this ancient piece of scripture were found in 1947 amidst fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. However, it was found scattered between caves in Israel's Qumran, so it's been difficult for historians to piece the story together. What scholars know for sure is that it appears to expand on the original story written in the equally mysterious Book of Enoch. The narrative describes how giants roamed the earth in the days before modern men. It details how God sent his angels to watch over early humanity, only to have them go against his wishes and breed with the humans to create a hybrid race of giants. The book then describes how the entire planet was engulfed in chaos as the giants kill and destroy ordinary people and partake in horrifying acts. They also supposedly practiced witchcraft and all kinds of forbidden magic. If the Book of Giants is to be believed, prior to the flood, Earth really was a stomping ground for half-angel, half-human giants. The Book of Enoch. According to biblical narratives, Enoch was the great-grandfather of Noah. He lived in the days before the Great Flood and was also one of the only people in biblical scripture to be taken into heaven by God himself before his death. Apparently, Enoch was part of the seventh generation of offspring from Adam and Eve. Taking all this at surface value, Enoch should be just as important as the other authors of biblical books. And yet, the Book of Enoch is considered inconsistent and unreliable in the eyes of the Church. It was never made official scripture nor official biblical canon. This is almost definitely because the content of the book is a little strange. It goes into a lot of fantastic history regarding the 200 Watchers, also known as Grigori, who seduced human women and created the Nephilim. However, the Book of Enoch is more than just tales of giants and demonic angels. It also goes into great detail about the incoming apocalypse. It discusses the 1,000-year reign of the Messiah, which will come before the end of all things. The book also mentions the birth of Noah, and there is a huge section on astronomy that seems fairly random. Many fragments of these books were found in Israel and are considered to be part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient texts did you find the most shocking? The Book of Demons. In the medieval days, just about every single person believed in the existence of supernatural beings, especially demons and spirits. In 1577, the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum was published as an appendix in a book about the nature of demons. It was authored by Dutch physician and demonologist Johann Bayer. It was around this time that the hierarchy of demons we know today became popular. People started to really believe in princes and dukes of hell. There was a whole royal family of demons, some more important than others. It's true that medieval people already believed in witchcraft, devilry, and angels and demons, but this new manuscript pushed things into the realm of the outrageous. Suddenly, there were 69 demons that people could look up in the book. Each demon and their position in hell was impeccably detailed, along with the hours and rituals required to conjure them. You know, in case you wanted to hang out. The book suggested people could conjure whichever demon they wanted from its home in hell, and then force the demon to do their bidding. The thing about this book is that everyone believed it, but it wasn't real. It was just a book written by a physician who had a fascination with the occult. It had no scientific or religious significance, and yet people took it for the truth. Remember that literacy rates were kind of low during this time, and books were expensive, mostly reserved for the upper class, such as noblemen and the clergy. Most of the time, books would be read out loud, and so if you heard these things from someone in a powerful position, you would probably believe them. At the end of the 16th century, medieval Europeans suddenly found themselves locked inside, trying to conjure obscure demons like Barbas, Zagan, Volok, Gomori, and who knows what else. Urine for diagnosing medical conditions. Medieval physicians had an extremely bizarre way to diagnose medical conditions. It was called uroscopy, or the examination of urine. And while the practice can be traced back 2,000 years to the days of early Rome, it really exploded and became widespread in the Middle Ages. Physicians would take a sample of their patient's urine, scrutinize the color and consistency, and also have a taste. In the Middle Ages, people were about as prudish as ever with certain things, but not others. It was socially unacceptable for a doctor to physically examine a patient. A doctor couldn't just ask their patient to remove their clothes, and so they couldn't see what they were dealing with. One could only hope their injury was somewhere visible on the arms or legs. Otherwise, they were in big trouble. As a workaround, doctors resorted to tasting urine. If they couldn't inspect their patient, they could at least drink their pee. They would get a sense of the taste, the smell, the color, and then make a diagnosis from there. Doctors even had a special wheel of urine that they could consult, cross-referencing shades with tastes and smells. The 17th century physician Thomas Willis claimed that if a patient had diabetes, their urine tasted sweet like honey. As absurd as that sounds, we know it's actually true in the case of diabetes mellitus. Tasting urine was one of the most effective methods of determining certain diseases, and the practice persisted until the end of the 19th century, with the invention of chemical analysis. Cat hunts. You've heard of witch hunts, but the Middle Ages was not a great time to be a cat. In medieval times, beginning around the 15th century, cats took on a sinister nature in Europe. The feline became a representation of evil, witchery, vulgarity, and female lust. In typical medieval fashion, people believed the only way to get rid of something that was evil was to burn it. For hundreds of years, all the way from England to Poland, people burned cats in massive numbers because they truly believed they were doing the work of the Lord. Killing cats was seen as a benevolent act, the same as burning witches or performing an exorcism. In Belgium, there was an event that took place on May 2nd every single year called Kattenstoot, or the Festival of Cats. The townspeople would gather up all the cats they could find, climb to the top of a belfry, and then throw them onto the street and set them on fire. It was another brutal and senseless tradition that medieval Europeans reveled in. The Festival of Cats was abolished in 1817, but it wasn't the only festival in Europe created specifically for tormenting felines. King Louis XIV reinstated the annual cat bonfire in 1648, an event that was received with roaring applause by the French. It was the French who took cat torture to perverse levels. It may have started as a way to banish wicked spirits and to ward away evil, but the truth is that medieval people really liked the sport of it, especially in France. They would hang cats in wicker cages, set them on fire, and then take the embers and ashes home for good luck. And on that note, it's shout-out time! I wanted to give a big shout-out to Francis Stephen Peralta and Ben Palmy. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the family. Lemuria. At some point in the Middle Ages, the belief in a mysterious continent started to spread throughout social circles. It became known as Lemuria and was said to be a lost continent far from Europe in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Lemuria was once home to a race of extinct humans who had 4 arms, male and female reproductive organs, and were a weird hybrid of humans and lemurs. In simple terms, Europeans in the Middle Ages believed in a lost land of monkey people. As rumors spread, the legends got even more bizarre, and scientists started getting very interested. The idea flourished, and as recently as the 19th century, people still believed it was hiding in the ocean somewhere. In 1864, British zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater wrote a paper about Lemuria and published it in the Quarterly Journal of Science. Around that same time, German biologist Ernst Haeckel claimed Lemuria was a secret land from which early Homo sapiens migrated out of Asia. People started to think of Lemuria as the cradle of humanity. Fast forward to 2013, and the idea of Lemuria was discarded as ridiculous. But scientists did find evidence on Mauritius that there once was a large landmass in the Indian Ocean. So the legend of Lemuria almost turned out to be true, just not the part about the ancient race of Lemurians. Obsessed with eels. One of the most important commodities in medieval England was the eel. There are very few eels left in Britain these days, except for the occasional eel pie you might come across in London. But over 500 years ago, eels were an obsession. These serpent-like fish were used by medieval citizens for everything from purchasing food to paying their rent. To give you an idea of just how much the landscape has changed since the Middle Ages, listen to this. Eels were once one of the most popular foods in England. People ate more eels than any other freshwater fish. They could be found in pretty much every body of water in the country. They were very abundant and easy to catch, so everyone ate them all the time. The English pulled so many eels out of the rivers, they are now almost extinct. In the 11th century, landlords would take all kinds of crazy payments for room and board. You could pay your rent in eggs, spice, corn, or even beer. At the end of the 11th century, there were more than 540,000 eels being paid as rent in England every year. Sacred defense. Throughout history, religious institutions have never been safe. This included churches in Europe, which were not always the sanctuaries we think of them as today. In most of Europe's history, churches and monasteries found themselves the victims of greedy groups of villains and invading armies. Starting around the Middle Ages, countries started building fortified churches to protect them. Nobody's sure exactly where it started, but the fad took off with great enthusiasm in Transylvania in Romania. Throughout the Middle Ages, over 300 fortified churches were built here. These were churches and monasteries enclosed within massive fortifications. Elaborate stone walls, defensive towers, battlements, and soldiers were put in a place to protect the priests and monks and all the treasures kept inside. The whole belief was that if the churches were fortified, they couldn't be razed to the ground by an opposing force. It was a big deal to protect these holy structures because they were usually a significant source of income for a particular place. The church was big business, and protecting it with strong walls proved to be a genius solution. In Transylvania, in a region that was frequently besieged by angry Ottomans, the fortified churches were a massive improvement. People no longer had to live in constant fear of being pillaged and destroyed. Mad Mercury. In the days of the Roman Empire, people poisoned themselves with lead. Centuries later, in medieval Europe, people were still poisoning themselves with lead. It wasn't only the peasants either, but many of the most affluent members of society. And it was all because of mercury, a substance that no one believed could possibly be the cause of so much death and insanity. These days, we all know the truth about mercury. It damages the nervous system, leading to a dip in intelligence, poor health, and potential insanity. Nobody knew this in the Roman Empire. They used lead like it was going out of style, and in the Middle Ages they continued to use lead in everything from medicine to pottery. Mercury was used by physicians who believed it could cure the worst diseases spreading throughout medieval Europe, mainly syphilis and leprosy. But it was also used in artwork and paint and to glaze pottery. The glazed pottery was used to hold food and drink at fancy parties, and the lead was steadily seeping mercury. A group of researchers recently investigated just how prevalent mercury poisoning was in the Middle Ages. They looked at 207 skeletons from graveyards throughout Denmark and Germany. They looked at both wealthy towns and rural villages. What they found was that people in the wealthy townships had been significantly more affected by mercury than those in poorer neighborhoods. Researcher Kari Lund Rasmussen says it was most likely because of the glazed pottery, highly toxic, yet in high demand because it looked so beautiful. Necromancers. Up until the 13th century in Europe, there wasn't a heavy belief in witches, malevolent spirits, sorcery, or the practice of magic. It was something known, but there wasn't widespread belief in vampires, monsters, and necromancers. People did believe in witches, but they weren't frightened of their children being carried off on broomsticks in the night. That all changed in the 13th century. Latin translations of texts about magic and astrology made their way into Europe. Books were easier to get than any time before, and many of the books available were ones on demonology and witchcraft. This reignited the belief in sorcery and ultimately led to the hysteria of the witch hunts later on. It all started with the distinguishing of two types of magic. The experts came up with natural magic, something that was more scientific and compatible with Christianity. Then there was necromancy, also known as black magic. This was something used to control spirits or devils, something used by practitioners to harness the power of the spirit world. The point is that in the Middle Ages, necromancers were seen as a very real threat. These were people who could supposedly use secret knowledge to gain dominion over demons and beings of evil. They could communicate with the dead, summon spirits to do their bidding, and were imbued with great power from beyond the grave. And while necromancers never truly existed, at least scientists say they definitely didn't, medieval people were still terrified of them. The Medieval Zodiac. The Zodiac was far more popular in the Middle Ages than it is today. You might know a few people who are obsessed with their astrological sign and looking at their horoscope, but in medieval Europe, it was a collective obsession. Just about every person believed everything that happened in their life was dictated by the sun, moon, and stars. What Saturn and Mars were doing that day in space directly affected what would happen to them on Earth. The 12 zodiac signs were the same 500 years ago as they are today, but they were used for much more than just giving a vague description. For example, take a look at this horoscope from the late 15th century, part of an astrology guide housed at the Amsterdam University's Special Collections Library. The horoscope is for an Aquarius. It says that when the sun is in Aquarius, meaning the southwest, one can build houses, sow their crops, plant their crops, and move into a new house. You can also let blood and do anything that will last only a short amount of time. Quarreling and battling is neither good nor bad, although one is not recommended to travel a long way. One can buy and sell cattle and any other animal so long as it has 4 feet. It's a good time to have weddings, but a bad time to practice skills. All of this information would directly affect when people would do all of these things, from getting married to selling a cow. The flat earth. One of the most common beliefs in the Middle Ages was that the earth is flat. Except that's not true at all, and is a common modern misconception about people in the Middle Ages. It's also not true that Christopher Columbus had difficulty funding his expedition to the West because people were worried that he would fall off the world and vanish. In reality, as strange as the Middle Ages were, not everybody was a believer in a flat earth. Columbus and most other educated people in Europe were well aware the earth was round. In fact, the Greeks were the ones who realized the Earth is a globe in the 4th century BC and calculated the dimensions of the planet. If that's true, why do most people assume medieval Europeans were flat Earth enthusiasts? The answer comes to us from the late 19th century. Professor Jeffrey Russell says the myth of Columbus and the flat Earth came from a man named Washington Irving, who wrote A History of Columbus in 1828. Irving claimed the experts in the 15th century refused funding for the voyage on account of their belief in a flat Earth. Irving made these claims as part of a 19th century rebellion against the church and its history of science bashing. Thanks for watching! What do you think was the craziest thing people from medieval days believed in? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye!